I'm Cassandra Mitchell, but everyone calls me Cassie. I'm 28, and last Tuesday my entire world collapsed when my father looked me dead in the eyes across our dinner table and said, "Leave the house key and don't come back." My mother just stared at her plate, nodding silently. Then my sister Heather handed me a suitcase, already packed. Years of walking on eggshells around my family ended with me standing on the driveway, homeless. But what they didn't know, sometimes being kicked out leads to unexpected revelations about who really owns what. Before I dive deeper into how my family erased me room by room, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had family turn their backs on you. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Growing up in suburban Boston, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father, Robert, a banking executive with a perpetual frown, my mother, Diana, a part-time real estate agent and full-time perfectionist, my older sister, Heather, who could do no wrong, and my younger brother, Kyle, who mostly tried to stay invisible. Then there was me, the middle child, the peacemaker, the one who was never quite enough. Our colonial-style house on Maple Street was my mother's pride and joy. For bedrooms, pristine landscaping, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine but rarely saw actual cooking. A house reflects the family within it, my mother would say, straightening picture frames that were already aligned perfectly. What the house actually reflected was the facade we maintained. From my earliest memories, love in our house came with conditions. Gold stars, perfect report cards, external validation, these were the currencies that purchased affection. Heather thrived in this environment. 2 years older than me, she was class president, valedictorian, and now a successful pharmaceutical sales rep with an equally successful husband. Kyle, for years younger, escaped into video games and later engineering school, minimizing contact while maintaining just enough connection to avoid criticism. I tried a different approach. Art had always been my passion, something my parents tolerated as a nice hobby, but certainly not a career path. Creative types never make any money, my father would lecture whenever I mentioned my dreams. Nevertheless, I pursued graphic design in college, a compromise I thought might satisfy both my creative instincts and my parents' practicality. After graduation, the 2008 recession hit and entry-level design jobs vanished. I took freelance work where I could find it, but consistent income remained elusive. With student loans looming, I reluctantly moved back home, temporarily. Temporary stretched into years. Each morning, I'd wake up in my childhood bedroom, unchanged since high school, and feel the weight of failure pressing down. My parents made sure I felt it too. Jessica's daughter bought a condo last year, my mother would mention casually over breakfast. And she's younger than you. When I was your age, my father would start, launching into stories of his early success that grew more impressive with each telling. I tried everything to please them. I took additional design courses. I worked retail on weekends to contribute to household expenses. I cooked, cleaned, ran errands. Nothing was enough. The criticism continued, growing sharper as months turned into years. 6 months ago, something shifted. My parents' disapproval morphed into something colder. They stopped asking about my job interviews. Conversations halted when I entered rooms. Heather visited more frequently, huddling with my parents in whispered consultations. "They're just worried about your future," Kyle told me during one of his rare visits home. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. Meanwhile, small changes began happening around the house. My childhood photos disappeared from the living room walls. My bookshelf in the family room was emptied for spring cleaning. My designated parking spot in the driveway was suddenly needed for guests. I was being erased, piece by piece. The morning before everything exploded, I overheard my mother on the phone. "Yes, the situation will be resolved very soon. We've been more than patient." Looking back, the signs were all there. I just couldn't imagine my own family would actually throw me away. My design business had finally started gaining traction. I'd landed 2 steady clients and was negotiating a contract with a local business that could potentially double my income. I'd started researching apartments, planning my exit on my own terms. Just 3 more months, I'd promised myself. Then I'll have enough saved for a security deposit. I never got those 3 months. Tuesday evenings were usually my night to cook, but that day my mother texted me, "Dad wants the family together for dinner. I'm making pot roast." That should have been my first clue. Pot roast was reserved for special occasions. I arrived home from meeting a client to find everyone already seated. Another red flag. We always waited for everyone before sitting down, a house rule strictly enforced throughout my childhood. "Sorry I'm late," I said, sliding into my usual chair. The client meeting ran long, but I think they're going to sign a 6-month contract. No one responded. My father methodically cut his meat. My mother rearranged her napkin. Heather stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, anticipation mixed with something else. Kyle studied his plate intensely. "Did something happen today?" I asked, the silence becoming unbearable. My father set down his knife and fork with precise movements. "Your mother and I have something to discuss with you." The formal tone sent a chill through me. He hadn't used that voice since catching me sneaking in past curfew at 17. "We've been patient," he continued. "Very patient. But it's been 6 years, Cassandra. I know I've been here longer than planned," I started, "but my business is finally taking off. I've been saving and—" "We're done," he interrupted. His voice was flat, emotionless. "This arrangement is over." My mother finally spoke. "We need to move forward with our lives. We've put our retirement plans on hold long enough." "I understand," I said, though confusion was building. Like I was saying, I've been looking at apartments. By August I should have. Not August, my father cut in again. "Now. Tonight." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Tonight? But that's not possible. I have nowhere to go. That's not our concern anymore." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table. "We've been more than generous." The paper was a check for $5,000. "To help you transition," my mother explained, her voice artificially gentle. "It's more than fair." "Fair?" My voice cracked. "How is this fair?" "I need time to find a place to leave the key," my father said, pointing to my house key sitting next to my plate, "and don't come back. This house was never yours." The finality in his tone silenced me. I looked toward my siblings for support, for any sign this wasn't really happening. Heather stood up, disappeared into the hallway, and returned with a large suitcase. "My suitcase?" She placed it beside my chair. "Your essentials are packed," she said with clinical efficiency. "Clothes, toiletries, laptop. I left the rest of your things in boxes in the garage." "You packed my things?" The betrayal was staggering. "How long have you been planning this?" "Long enough," my father answered. This decision wasn't made lightly. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's for the best, sweetie. You need to stand on your own feet. And you need your house back, right?" Bitterness rose in my throat. "Can't have your embarrassing failure of a daughter cramping your style anymore." "That's enough," my father warned. "We've supported you longer than most parents would. It's time." Kyle still hadn't spoken, hadn't even looked up. "Kyle," I pleaded, "you're just going to sit there?" He glanced up briefly, guilt written across his face, then looked away. "It's their house, Cass," he mumbled. I felt like I was drowning. "So that's it? After everything, you're just throwing me away?" "Don't be dramatic," Heather sighed. "We're helping you become independent. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" I stood so quickly my chair tipped backward, crashing to the floor. "For being ambushed?" "For being kicked out with nowhere to go." "You have the check," my father reminded me coldly. "And friends, presumably. Figure it out." I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally and saw nothing but strangers. "I need to get my things from upstairs." "Already packed," Heather repeated, gesturing to the suitcase. And we've converted your room. Mom needs a proper home office now that she's taking on more clients. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just decided this today. They'd been planning it, preparing for it, erasing me systematically for weeks. You've already emptied my room? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Before even telling me I had to leave? My mother had the decency to look uncomfortable. We knew you'd be upset. This seemed cleaner. Cleaner, I echoed. Like wiping away a stain. I grabbed the check and stuffed it in my pocket, though every part of me wanted to tear it to pieces in front of them. Pride wouldn't pay for a hotel room. Take your key, my father instructed as I reached for the suitcase. I stared at the small piece of metal that had represented home and safety for most of my life. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and placed it precisely in the center of the table. Goodbye, then. I looked at each of them one last time, memorizing their faces, knowing something irreparable had broken between us. No one moved to stop me as I wheeled the suitcase through the house, past the carefully arranged family photos that no longer included me, past the living room where we'd once celebrated birthdays and Christmases, past the kitchen where my mother had taught me to bake cookies when I was still someone she wanted in her life. The front door closed behind me with a quiet click, more final than any slam could have been. In the driveway, I stood frozen, the reality of my situation sinking in. Where would I go? What would I do? How had my life imploded so completely in the span of a dinner? I loaded the suitcase into my car. A 10-year-old Honda that had been my college graduation present, now the only piece of home I had left. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The porch light switched off, plunging the house into darkness. That night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, too shocked to cry, too numb to plan, watching the sunrise through my windshield and wondering how the people who were supposed to love me most in the world could discard me so easily. The first 72 hours after being kicked out passed in a blur of disbelief and desperate pragmatism. The backseat of my Honda became my bedroom, the Walmart bathroom my morning routine, and the local Starbucks, with its free Wi-Fi and air conditioning, my office. Each night, I'd park in a different location, paranoid about security guards or police telling me to move along. On day 3, with my neck cramping and my spirits plummeting, I finally swallowed my pride and called Rachel, my closest friend from college who lived in a nearby suburb. "Oh my God, Cassie," she gasped after I explained my situation. "Of course you can stay with me. Come over right now." Rachel's one-bedroom apartment barely had room for her, let alone a surprise roommate, but she cleared a space on her living room floor without complaint. That night, lying on a borrowed air mattress, I finally broke down, sobbing until my throat burned and my eyes swelled shut. "I don't understand," I kept repeating. "Who does this to their own daughter?" "Your parents are monsters," Rachel said firmly, passing me another tissue. "This isn't normal, Cassie. Families don't do this." But mine had. And somehow I had to keep functioning. The next morning, I showered, put on my most professional outfit from my hastily packed suitcase, and went to my client meeting as if my entire life hadn't just imploded. I smiled, presented design concepts, and discussed timelines while internally calculating how many nights I could reasonably impose on Rachel before needing another solution. During lunch breaks, I searched apartment listings, quickly realizing the brutal reality. Boston's rental market was far beyond what I could afford on my inconsistent freelance income, even with the parting gift my parents had given me. Every decent apartment required first and last month's rent plus security deposit, nearly triple what I had saved. "Just stay with me until you figure things out," Rachel insisted. But her small apartment was already feeling cramped after just a few days, and I could see the strain in her smile. I reached out to other friends, but spare rooms were non-existent, and couches were offered with reluctance. "Maybe for a weekend" was the common refrain. In desperation, I called my mother's sister, Aunt Pamela, hoping family ties might translate to temporary housing. "Oh, Cassandra," she sighed when I explained my situation. "Your mother already called me. She said you chose to move out rather suddenly, and they're very worried about you." My blood ran cold. That's not what happened. "Well, I'm sure there are two sides to every story," she hedged. "But getting involved in the middle of family disputes never ends well. I'm sure you'll work things out with your parents soon." One by one, extended family members repeated variations of the same message. They'd already heard my parents' side and didn't want to get involved. The family narrative had been established without my input. 2 weeks after being kicked out, I found my housing solution, a basement apartment in Dorchester that smelled perpetually of mildew and had windows so small they barely qualified as emergency exits. The rent consumed nearly 70% of my expected monthly income, but it was available immediately and required only first month's rent up front due to its obvious deficiencies. "You can't live here," Rachel said flatly when she helped me move in. "This place isn't safe." "It's temporary," I promised, though we both knew affordable housing alternatives weren't magically going to appear. The basement apartment became both sanctuary and prison. I worked longer hours than ever, taking on additional freelance projects regardless of pay, desperate to build a financial cushion. My makeshift desk, a door balanced on plastic crates, became command central for my growing business and my attempts to rebuild my life. 3 weeks after moving in, I texted my mother, "I'd like to pick up the rest of my belongings from the garage." Her reply came hours later, "We've donated most items to Goodwill." Space was needed. "What remains is in boxes by the side gate. Please collect by tomorrow." When I arrived the next day, no one answered the door despite cars in the driveway. For cardboard boxes sat by the gate as promised, labeled in Heather's precise handwriting, "Cassandra's things." Opening them in my apartment that evening revealed the brutal editing of my life. My professional portfolio and art supplies had made the cut. Most of my books remained. But the memory box containing childhood keepsakes, drawings, school awards, birthday cards was gone. So were my photo albums, yearbooks, and the quilt my grandmother had made for my 16th birthday. I called my mother, anger overriding caution. "Where are my personal items? My photo albums? Grandma's quilt?" "We kept family photos in the family," she replied coolly. "And that quilt was actually meant to stay in the guest room. If you'd like, I can send you the children's art projects." We didn't think they held any value. "They held value to me," I said, my voice cracking. "Those were my memories." "Well," she sighed, "perhaps this is a good opportunity to focus on making new memories instead of dwelling on the past." The conversation ended soon after, with nothing resolved and the growing realization that the erasure of my presence from the family home and the family itself had been more calculated than I'd initially understood. That night, sitting on my lumpy secondhand mattress in my damp basement apartment, surrounded by the meager remains of my past, I finally acknowledged the truth. This hadn't been a sudden decision or a momentary lapse in parental judgment. This had been a planned eviction, methodically executed, with my family united in their determination to remove me from their lives. As summer heat made my basement apartment increasingly unbearable, my health began to suffer. Mold aggravated allergies I didn't know I had. Lack of proper ventilation left me perpetually lightheaded. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by anxiety dreams where I was locked outside my childhood home, pounding on doors while my family calmly ate dinner inside, ignoring my cries. Yet somehow, in spite of everything, or perhaps because of it, my business began to flourish. Clients referred friends. A local business association featured my designs in their newsletter. The contract I'd mentioned at that last fateful dinner came through, providing my first steady income since graduation. It wasn't enough to escape my basement dungeon, but it was enough to believe escape might eventually be possible. And that small hope kept me going, one day at a time, as summer dragged on and my former life receded further into memory. Late August brought a heat wave that transformed my basement apartment into a sauna. I'd taken to working in the public library, returning home only to sleep, or attempt to sleep, in front of a battery-operated fan that barely stirred the humid air. It was during one of these library sessions that my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "Miss Mitchell," a formal voice inquired when I answered. "This is Sandra from Blackwell, Pierce and Associates. We've been trying to reach you by mail." "I'm sorry, who?" I balanced my phone while gathering my belongings, drawing irritated looks from nearby library patrons. "We're a law firm representing the estate of Catherine Mitchell. We have some urgent matters to discuss with you. Would you be available to come to our office this afternoon?" Catherine Mitchell, my grandmother. She had passed away 3 years ago. What could possibly be urgent now? Is something wrong? I asked, stepping outside the library into the blinding afternoon sun. "Not wrong, no. But time-sensitive. Would 3 p.m. work for you?" For hours later, I sat in a coolly elegant conference room across from Franklin Pierce, a silver-haired attorney whose kindly demeanor seemed at odds with his imposing office. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Mitchell," he began, opening a thick folder. "I apologize for the delay in contacting you. We've been sending correspondence to your parents' address as directed in your grandmother's instructions." "I no longer live there," I said, the words still painful to voice aloud. "Yes, we gathered that when our certified letters were returned. Fortunately, we were able to trace you through your business registration." He slid a document across the table. "This is the reason for our meeting. Your grandmother established a trust before her passing. You are the primary beneficiary." I stared at the document, legal terms swimming before my eyes. "I don't understand. When Grandma died, the family was told everything went to my parents." Mr. Pierce's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "The majority of her liquid assets did indeed go to your father. However, there was a separate trust established with specific conditions." He turned several pages, pointing to a highlighted section. "The Catherine Mitchell Family Trust holds the deed to the property at 47 Maple Street. According to these terms, the house was placed in trust 20 years ago, with your parents designated as trustees and permitted to reside there under specific conditions." My breath caught. 47 Maple Street? That's my parents' house. Actually, Ms. Mitchell, it's your grandmother's house. And now, according to these conditions, it's yours. The room seemed to tilt. That can't be right. My parents bought that house before I was born. Mr. Pierce shook his head gently. Your parents made payments to the trust, which your grandmother established to appear as a mortgage. But they never owned the property. Catherine Mitchell purchased it outright and created this arrangement for reasons she explains here. He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. Your grandmother stipulated that this letter be given to you upon either your 28th birthday or in the event that your parents forced you to leave the family home, whichever came first. He paused. When our letters were returned, we investigated and discovered you're no longer residing at the property. May I ask if you left voluntarily? The memory of that dinner, of my packed suitcase and my father's cold eyes surged through me. No, I whispered. I was told to leave. Immediately. Something like satisfaction crossed his face. Then, according to the terms of the trust, full ownership transfers to you effective immediately. Your parents have violated the residency conditions. My hands trembled as I opened my grandmother's letter, dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Cassandra, asterisk. If you're reading this, then either you've turned 28 or what I've long feared has come to pass. Your parents have shown their true colors at last, asterisk. I've watched for years as they've manipulated and diminished you. I've seen the light in your eyes dim with each criticism, each conditional approval. I recognize the pattern because I witnessed the same with your father growing up. My son became exactly like his father, despite all my efforts, asterisk. When Robert and Diana were looking to buy their first home, I made them an offer they couldn't refuse. I would purchase the house outright. They would make payments to me instead of a bank, and the house would eventually become theirs. What I never told them was that I had no intention of ever transferring ownership to them. I knew, somehow, that you would need protection one day. Asterisk. The house is yours now, Cassandra. The legal documents are ironclad. Your parents have been paying rent all these years, though they believed they were building equity. The trust has accumulated those payments and they're now available to you for maintenance of the property or however you see fit. Asterisk. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you more directly while I was alive. Your parents would have simply cut me off from all of you, and I couldn't bear to lose those precious moments with my grandchildren. But I could plan and wait and ensure that when the moment came, as I always feared it would, you would have solid ground beneath your feet. Asterisk. Remember who you are, my sweet girl. You are stronger than they've ever given you credit for. You are worthy of love without conditions. And now you have a home that is truly yours. Asterisk. All my love. Asterisk. Grandma Catherine. Asterisk. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. My grandmother, quiet and observant, had seen everything, had known my parents better than I ever had, and had created a safety net I never knew existed. There's more, Mr. Pierce said gently when I looked up. The trust includes maintenance funds of approximately $178,000, plus the remaining equity in the property, which is substantial. I don't understand, I said, still struggling to process this revelation. If the house belongs to the trust, how did my parents not know? The arrangement was intentionally complex, he explained. Your grandmother created the illusion of a traditional mortgage. Your parents made monthly payments, received tax documents consistent with home ownership, and were allowed to make decisions about the property. But the deed remained in the trust's name, with specific succession terms. As he continued explaining the legal details, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, but in my dazed state, I answered automatically. Ms. Mitchell? This is Thomas Wilson from First National Bank. We're calling regarding the transfer of property at 47 Maple Street. As the new owner, we need to schedule a meeting to discuss the accounts associated with the property. New owner, I repeated, the words still not feeling real. Yes, we've received the documentation from the trust administrators this morning. Congratulations. When would be convenient to discuss next steps? As I scheduled the meeting mechanically, a strange calm settled over me. After months of being untethered, of having the ground repeatedly disappear beneath my feet, something solid had finally emerged, something that couldn't be taken away. Mr. Pierce waited patiently until I ended the call. I take it that was the bank? I nodded, still stunned. They'll be contacting your parents as well, informing them of the change in ownership status. He paused. A mess. Mitchell, I should warn you that this will likely come as a significant shock to them. Your grandmother was very specific about keeping these arrangements confidential until the transfer conditions were met. The implications began to sink in. My parents, who had thrown me away like unwanted furniture, were about to discover that in doing so, they had triggered the loss of their home. The home they thought was theirs. The home they had used as the ultimate weapon against me. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. That depends largely on you, Mr. Pierce replied. As the legal owner, you have options. Your parents currently occupy the property without a lease or legal right. You could demand immediate vacancy, negotiate a formal rental agreement, or any number of alternatives. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of power return. Not the desperate scrabbling for control that had defined my post-eviction existence, but genuine agency over my own circumstances. I need time to think, I said finally. Mr. Pierce nodded. Of course. But I should mention one more thing. Your grandmother included a timeline provision. Once ownership transfers, you have 60 days to establish residency in the property, or alternative succession terms activate. Meaning that to fully inherit, you need to live in the house. Your grandmother was quite clear that she wanted the property to be your home, not merely an asset. As I left the law office, Clutching the folder of documents that would change everything, I felt my grandmother's presence almost tangibly. She had seen what I couldn't, had planned for a contingency I never imagined possible, and had quietly ensured that when my family discarded me, I would land on my feet in a home that was truly mine. The first call came while I was still in the taxi heading back to my apartment. My phone displayed Mom on the screen, a name I hadn't seen there in months. I let it go to voicemail. Then came my father, then Heather. By the time I reached my building, I had 7 missed calls and a flurry of increasingly frantic text messages. There's been a mistake with the bank. Call us immediately. What have you done? I silenced my phone and sat on my bed, spreading the trust documents around me like a protective circle. I needed to think clearly, strategically, without the immediate emotional pull of my family's panic. The next morning, I met with Mr. Pierce again, this time with specific questions about my legal options and responsibilities. He connected me with a real estate attorney who specialized in eviction proceedings, a term that felt surreally appropriate given my own recent experience. Legally, you could demand they vacate immediately, the attorney explained. They have no lease, no standing. But realistically, eviction processes take time, especially with resistant occupants. And they will resist, I said with absolute certainty. 3 days after receiving the bank's notification, my father sent an email, formal, coldly professional, as if addressing a business adversary rather than his daughter. Cassandra, asterisk. It has come to our attention that there has been a serious legal error regarding our home. While we understand you may feel justified in pursuing this mistake to your advantage given recent tensions, I urge you to consider the long-term consequences of such actions on our family. Asterisk. Your mother and I are willing to overlook the unpleasantness of the past few months and work toward reconciliation, provided this property matter is resolved promptly and appropriately. Asterisk. Please have your legal representation contact us to rectify this situation. Asterisk. Robert Mitchell. Asterisk. No acknowledgement of throwing me out. No recognition of what they had done. Just recent tensions and unpleasantness, as if we'd had a minor disagreement about holiday plans rather than them destroying my sense of security and family in a single night. On Mr. Pierce's advice, I didn't respond directly. Instead, we prepared a formal notice informing the current occupants that the property had transferred ownership and they would need to vacate within 30 days or face legal eviction proceedings. The notice included the option to discuss a formal lease arrangement, should they wish to remain as tenants. 2 copies were sent, one by certified mail, one delivered by a process server to ensure there could be no claim of non-receipt. The day after delivery, my mother appeared at the door of my basement apartment, something I hadn't even realized she knew the location of. This isn't funny anymore, Cassandra, she said when I opened the door, holding the notice like it was contaminated. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. I stood blocking the entrance, unwilling to invite her into the squalid space that her actions had relegated me to. This isn't about making a point. It's about legal reality. The house belongs to the trust. It always has. That's absurd. We've paid the mortgage for 25 years. You paid Grandma, not a mortgage company. She owned it outright. Her face flushed. That's not possible. Your father handles all our finances. He would have known. Apparently not, I replied, a calmness in my voice that surprised even me. But you can take it up with Mr. Pierce if you don't believe me. All the documentation is legitimate. This is how you repay us? After everything we've done for you. Her voice rose sharply. By trying to steal our home? The injustice of her accusation broke through my careful composure. Steal? You threw me out. You packed my things before even telling me I had to leave. You erased me from that house room by room, and now you're upset that it turns out the house was never yours to begin with. We are your parents. Parents don't discard their children when they become inconvenient. A neighbor poked her head out, drawn by our raised voices. My mother immediately composed herself, her public mask sliding into place. We'll fight this, she said quietly. Your father has already spoken with our attorney. This so-called trust won't hold up in court. But it did. Over the following weeks, my parents' increasingly desperate legal maneuvers fell flat against the ironclad documents my grandmother had prepared. Their attorney eventually admitted that the trust was legitimate and legally binding. Their tactics then shifted. If they couldn't challenge the trust legally, they would challenge me personally. Rumors began circulating among family friends and relatives. I was unstable. I was vindictive. I had manipulated my grandmother in her final days. I was having a mental breakdown. They're telling everyone you're delusional, Rachel reported after running into my mother's friend at the grocery store. That you've invented this whole trust story because you're having some kind of psychotic episode. My cousin texted, Aunt Diana says you need help. Is everything okay? Mom and Dad are really worried about you. Meanwhile, my father attempted more direct pressure. He left a voicemail detailing all the financial investments they'd made in the property over the years, the renovated kitchen, the finished basement, the landscaping. If you persist with this charade, he warned, we'll sue for the value of all improvements made under the fraudulent pretense that we were building equity. Mr. Pierce assured me these threats were legally baseless, but they took an emotional toll. Each day brought new accusations, new attempts to make me doubt myself and my right to claim what my grandmother had explicitly left to me. During a routine inspection arranged through the trust, we discovered that my parents had been systematically draining the house maintenance fund for years, using it for vacations, Heather's wedding, and other personal expenses while neglecting critical repairs. The roof needed replacing. The foundation showed cracks. The electrical system wasn't up to code. They've been treating the house like an ATM, Mr. Pierce observed grimly, while performing only cosmetic maintenance visible to visitors. As the legal battle intensified, an unexpected message appeared in my inbox one evening. Cassie, asterisk. It's Kyle. I'm using my university email so Mom and Dad won't see. I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere private? Asterisk. K asterisk. 2 days later, we sat in a coffee shop 30 miles from my parents' house, my brother nervously shredding a napkin between his fingers. They're freaking out, he said after awkward initial pleasantries. Dad's barely sleeping. Mom cries all the time. It's chaos. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle, I said sincerely. Kyle had always been the family ghost, present but rarely noticed, navigating the currents of tension by becoming invisible. They never told me they were kicking you out, he blurted suddenly. I came home for the weekend and your room was already emptied. Mom said you decided to move out suddenly. It wasn't until that night at dinner that I realized what had really happened, and by then it was too late. I finished for him. He nodded miserably. I should have said something, done something, but you know how they are. I didn't know. The crushing weight of their disapproval. The cold silence that could last for weeks if you challenged them. The subtle ways they could make you question your own perceptions and worth. Do they know you're meeting me? I asked. He shook his head. They've forbidden anyone from contacting you. They're telling everyone you're having some kind of breakdown. And do you believe that? Kyle met my eyes directly for the first time. No. I think you finally stood up to them and they can't handle it. He hesitated, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn photo album. I took this from the attic before they could get rid of it. It's mostly pictures of you and Grandma. I thought you might want it. As I flipped through the pages, birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments preserved in time, I felt the first genuine connection to my past since that night in June. Here was evidence that I had existed in that house, in that family, despite their attempts to erase me. Thank you, I whispered, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. There's something else you should know, Kyle said, lowering his voice. Dad's been contacting all of Grandma's old friends, trying to find evidence that she wasn't mentally competent when she set up the trust. And they're documenting everything in the house. Taking pictures of all your old stuff they kept, creating this narrative that you still have a room there, that they never kicked you out. The depths to which they would sink should have shocked me, but somehow it didn't. This was who they had always been, masters of reality manipulation, experts at rewriting history to maintain their perfect family facade. Kyle, I said carefully, I'm going to move forward with claiming the house. I legally have to establish residency there within the next few weeks. I want you to know that whatever happens with Mom and Dad, you will always have a place with me. He gave a small, sad smile. I know, but I'm at college most of the year anyway. He stood to leave, then paused. Cassie? Grandma would be proud of you. She always said you were the strongest one of all of us. I don't think any of us understood what she meant until now. As he walked away, I sat with the photo album open on my lap, tracing my grandmother's smile with my finger. In every picture, she stood slightly apart, watching, observing, just as she had in life. Seeing everything, planning quietly, waiting for the moment when her protection would be most needed. In that coffee shop, surrounded by strangers and holding tangible proof of my own history, I made my decision. The time for hesitation was over. I would claim what was rightfully mine, not just the house itself, but the security and belonging that had been stolen from me. That evening, I instructed my attorney to proceed with formal eviction notices. No more options for lease arrangements. No more negotiations. My parents had 30 days to vacate the premises, or law enforcement would be involved. As expected, they didn't go quietly. But for once, all their manipulation tactics, their social connections, their carefully constructed personas couldn't change the fundamental reality. The house was mine, they had no legal right to remain, and their time was running out. The day I returned to 47, Maple Street as its legal owner was surreal in its anticlimactic nature. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final showdown. My parents, recognizing the inevitability of their position, had vacated the premises the day before, leaving behind a house that was simultaneously familiar and foreign. Rachel accompanied me, both for moral support and as a witness in case any issues arose. We stood in the foyer, keys in hand, listening to the strange silence of the empty house. "Are you okay?" she asked as I stared at the living room, now stripped of furniture and family photos. "I think so," I said, though the emotional reality was far more complex than those 3 words could capture. My parents had technically complied with the eviction order, but their compliance came with a final act of spite. They had taken everything: furniture, appliances, light fixtures, even the curtain rods. Where they couldn't remove items permanently attached to the house, they had damaged them. Gouges marked the hardwood floors where furniture had been dragged. Holes punctuated the walls where artwork had hung. "They really scorched the earth," Rachel murmured as we moved from room to room, cataloging the damage. In my old bedroom, briefly my mother's office before becoming a storage room in their hasty exit, water damage stained the ceiling from a mysteriously overflowed bathroom above. The built-in bookshelves my grandfather had installed when I was 10 had been partially dismantled. Yet amid the petty destruction, they had overlooked things in their rush to strip the house bare. In the kitchen, the loose floorboard that had served as my childhood hiding place for treasures remained untouched. Beneath it, I found a small tin box containing forgotten childhood trinkets, a smooth river stone, a handmade bracelet, a tiny carved wooden bird my grandfather had made. "They missed some things," I said, showing Rachel my discoveries. "They missed the most important thing," she replied. "They missed that this house is more than just stuff. It's yours now, Cassie. Really yours." Over the next few weeks, the house slowly transformed from a battleground back into a home. The trust funds covered immediate repairs, and I splurged on new furniture, pieces I chose, in colors I loved, arranged how I wanted them. No more beige sofas selected for resale value. No more formal dining sets used twice a year for show. Rachel helped me paint the walls in soft blues and greens, colors my mother had always dismissed as too juvenile. My basement apartment furniture, mismatched and secondhand though it was, filled the spaces with an authenticity the house had never known under my parents' careful curation. 3 weeks after moving in, while measuring for new kitchen cabinets, I discovered something extraordinary. Behind the pantry's false back wall, installed during a renovation when I was in high school, was a small hidden room. Just 8 by 10 feet, it had clearly been deliberately concealed during the remodel my parents had overseen. Inside, untouched by time or my parents' knowledge, sat boxes labeled in my grandmother's handwriting, "For Cassandra, when the time comes." The room contained family heirlooms my grandmother had hidden away, photo albums, journals, her wedding china, antique jewelry, along with documents detailing family history my parents had always kept vague. Most precious of all were her journals, dozens of them, spanning decades of observations. Robert and Diana redecorated Cassandra's room while she was at summer camp. One entry from my childhood read, they threw away her rock collection and art supplies, claiming they were cluttering the space. The child came home to a room that no longer reflected her spirit at all. She tried so hard not to cry. I see the pattern repeating, and it breaks my heart. Another, dated during my college years. They speak of Cassandra's art as if it's a phase to outgrow, not a calling to nurture. They did the same with Robert's interest in music years ago. These children are not allowed to become themselves, only reflections of what their parents demand. Reading these journals was like finding a witness to my life, someone who had seen the subtle manipulations and erasures I had experienced, but could never quite articulate. My grandmother had recognized the dynamics at play long before I had the language to name them. The discovery of this hidden room felt like my grandmother reaching through time, saying, "I saw you. I knew. And I prepared." As September turned to October, the house continued its transformation. The damaged roof was replaced, the cracked foundation repaired, the outdated electrical system brought up to code. With each repair, each personal touch added, the house shifted from being my parents' house to truly becoming mine. One unseasonably warm evening, I invited Rachel and a few close friends for the house's first dinner party. As we sat around my new table, a beautiful reclaimed wood piece I'd found at a local craftsman's shop, eating off my grandmother's china and laughing freely, the house seemed to exhale, as if relieved to finally host genuine joy within its walls. That night, after everyone had left, I stood in the backyard, looking up at the house, my house, all windows warmly lit from within. For the first time since that fateful dinner in June, I felt something close to peace. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. My sister Heather stood on the porch, immaculately dressed as always, but with an unfamiliar tension in her posture. "May I come in?" she asked formally when I opened the door. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered cautiously, eyes widening at the changes to the interior. "It looks different," she said, clearly struggling to find neutral commentary. "It looks like me now," I replied simply. We sat in awkward silence in the living room, the air between us heavy with unspoken history. Finally, Heather spoke. "Mom and Dad are staying with us while they look for a new place. It's been challenging." I said nothing, waiting. "They're not handling this well," she continued. "Dad's talking about lawsuits again, though his attorney keeps telling him it's pointless." "Why are you here, Heather?" I asked directly. "If they sent you to negotiate." "They don't know I'm here," she interrupted, surprising me. "I came because—" She paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I came because I need to understand how none of us knew about Grandma's trust. How you managed to hide this from everyone for so long." The accusation was so absurd I actually laughed. "Hide it? I found out the same day you did. The same day the bank called me." She studied my face, searching for deception. "That's not possible. You must have known." "Why must I have known?" "Because it doesn't fit the family narrative that I'm manipulative and unstable." Because it's easier to believe I orchestrated some elaborate scheme than to accept that Grandma saw through all of you decades ago. Heather flinched. That's not fair. Fair. The word ignited something in me. Was it fair to pack my things before even telling me I had to leave? Was it fair to erase me from family photos? Was it fair to throw away my childhood memories? You weren't making any effort to move out, she shot back. You were taking advantage. I was building a business from scratch during the worst economy in decades. I was contributing to household expenses, helping with chores, looking for apartments within my budget. Meanwhile, you were the golden child who could do no wrong, who never had to prove her worth, who was perfect enough to keep them happy, she interrupted, voice cracking. Do you have any idea what that pressure was like? To never fail, never disappoint, never show weakness? At least you got to be a disappointment, Cassie. I never had that luxury. Her words stopped me cold. For the first time, I glimpsed the prison Heather had built for herself, or rather, the prison our parents had built and she had maintained, believing it to be a palace. I'm sorry, I said finally. I never saw it that way. How could you? We were all too busy playing our assigned roles. She looked around the transformed living room. But now the roles have changed, haven't they? The failure daughter owns the family home, and the perfect daughter is hosting parents who can't stop raging about their humiliation. The irony hung between us, neither bitter nor sweet, simply true. Carl comes to see me sometimes, I offered after a moment. He took pictures of us and Grandma from the attic before they could disappear. Something like grief crossed Heather's face. Kyle was always smarter than we gave him credit for. Quieter, but smarter. We talked for another hour, not resolving decades of complicated family dynamics, but perhaps beginning to see each other as people rather than as the roles we'd been assigned. When she left, neither of us knew what came next for our relationship, but something had shifted, however slightly. That evening, alone in the house that had witnessed so much of my family's history, I started a journal of my own, a continuation of my grandmother's tradition of bearing witness, of recording truth as it actually was, not as others demanded it be seen. Today, Heather visited. I wrote. For the first time, we spoke as adults, not as competitors in a game neither of us designed. I don't know if reconciliation is possible or even desirable with my parents. But perhaps with my siblings, there's a chance for something new to grow from the ashes of what our parents burned down. As October turned to November, I continued to make the house truly mine. I converted the formal dining room into an art studio, filling it with natural light and creative possibility. The hidden room became a reading nook, lined with bookshelves holding my grandmother's journals and the books I was slowly rebuilding my collection with. Most symbolically, I removed the door to my old bedroom, the room that had been emptied and converted without my knowledge or consent, and transformed the space into an open meditation area, with floor cushions and plants and nothing that could be closed off or hidden away again. Room by room, I reclaimed the space that had once been used as a weapon against me. And with each change, each personalization, I felt not just the house, but myself transforming, becoming not who my family had demanded I be, but who I was always meant to become. Spring came to 47, Maple Street with a gentleness that seemed to mirror my own healing. 6 months had passed since I'd reclaimed the house, and the initial chaos of transition had given way to a steady, peaceful routine. My design business had flourished, partly due to a feature in a local business magazine that had brought in several new clients. I'd converted the basement, once a dark storage space under my parents' reign, into a bright, professional home office. The garden, neglected for years under my mother's superficial landscaping priorities, now burst with native plants and wildflowers I'd researched and planted myself. Like the house itself, the garden had been transformed from a showy facade into something authentic and alive. On a warm Saturday morning, as I pruned the rose bushes my grandmother had originally planted decades ago, I contemplated the journey of the past year. From that devastating dinner to homelessness, to unexpected inheritance, to reclamation. Each step had stripped away another layer of conditioning, revealing a stronger, more authentic self beneath. The most difficult decision had been determining what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with my parents going forward. They had eventually found a condo in a nearby town, maintaining their social connections while creating a narrative of downsizing by choice that most of their friends seemed to accept without question. 3 months after moving into the house, I had received a formal letter from them, not apologizing for their actions, but proposing a fresh start now that misunderstandings had been cleared up. The letter made no mention of the night they'd thrown me out, no acknowledgement of the damage they'd caused emotionally or to the house itself. It was classic revisionist history, their specialty. After much reflection and several sessions with a therapist I'd started seeing, I responded with boundaries rather than reconciliation. I would consider limited contact in the future, but only with acknowledgement of what had actually occurred and genuine effort toward change. Their response had been predictable: hurt indignation, claims that I was dwelling in the past, insistence that family should forgive without conditions. My grandmother's journals had helped me recognize these tactics for what they were: manipulation disguised as family values. I held firm to my boundaries, and communication had largely ceased again, though I occasionally heard updates through Kyle or, surprisingly, Heather. My relationship with my siblings had evolved in unexpected ways. Kyle, now in his final year of engineering school, visited regularly, slowly sharing more about his own experiences growing up in our parents' shadow. Quiet Kyle, it turned out, had observed and understood far more than any of us had realized. Heather's journey had been more complicated. After our initial conversation, she'd retreated back into the family fold for several months. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, she began reaching out, first with brief, casual texts, then coffee meetings where we carefully avoided family topics, then finally more honest conversations about our shared history. "I'm starting to see things differently," she admitted during a recent visit. "Watching them recreate the same patterns in their new place, it's like seeing the same play with a different backdrop." The inheritance had changed more than just my housing situation. The trust funds designated for home maintenance had been substantial, and my grandmother's attorney had helped me invest a portion for future needs while using the rest to repair the years of neglect the house had suffered. Additionally, I had discovered that my grandmother had established a separate educational trust for me. Funds my parents had apparently known about but never disclosed, claiming my impractical career choices didn't qualify for support. With financial security I'd never known before, I'd been able to expand my design business, hire an assistant, and even fund a small scholarship for art students at the local community college, something I knew would have made my grandmother proud. The most profound discovery came during renovations to the kitchen. Contractors removing the old cabinetry found a sealed metal box embedded in the wall, labeled simply "Foundations" in my grandmother's handwriting. Inside was a final letter from her, apparently hidden during the kitchen renovation years earlier, along with family documents dating back generations. "My dearest Cassandra, **. If you found this, then the house has truly become yours, down to its very bones. I hid this letter during the remodel, knowing your parents would never look beneath the surface of things, **. The documents enclosed tell our family's true history, not the sanitized version your father prefers. We come from survivors and rebels, people who made difficult choices and sometimes terrible mistakes, but who always prioritized love over appearances, **. Your grandfather and I watched with breaking hearts as your father rejected these values, embracing instead the hollow pursuit of status and control that his father, a man I refused to allow near any of my grandchildren, had valued above all else, **. The cycle of emotional manipulation in this family goes back generations, but it can end with you, Cassandra. You have always seen beneath surfaces, valued authenticity over perfection, kindness over control, **. The house is just a house, wood and stone and memories. The true inheritance I hope to leave you is the courage to live authentically, to love generously, and to recognize that family is defined by actions, not blood alone. Asterisk. Whatever relationship you choose to have with your parents going forward, remember that their limitations are not yours to bear. Their inability to see your worth reflects their blindness, not your value. Asterisk. All my love, now and always. Asterisk. Grandma Catherine. Asterisk. Reading this final message, found literally within the foundations of the home she had secured for me, brought both tears and a profound sense of peace. My grandmother had not only provided physical shelter, but emotional armor against the toxic patterns she had recognized in our family. In honor of her legacy, I began hosting monthly dinners for a carefully curated, chosen family, friends who had supported me through my darkest times, a few extended relatives who had reached out after learning the full story, Kyle and occasionally Heather. Even my old landlord from the basement apartment who had shown me unexpected kindness during my period of transition. These gatherings filled the house with what it had always lacked under my parents' ownership: genuine warmth, unguarded laughter, conversations where dissent was welcomed rather than punished. The formal spaces designed for show had become casual areas for connection. The house, like me, had been liberated from appearances. On the anniversary of that fateful dinner when my family had discarded me, I decided to perform a personal ritual of closure. In the backyard, I built a small fire in the stone pit and symbolically burned the eviction notice my parents had been served, along with the check they had given me as a parting gift. As I watched the papers curl and blacken in the flames, I felt the last traces of bitterness begin to release their hold. The anger that had fueled me through those first terrible months had served its purpose, giving me the strength to survive and fight back. But I no longer needed it to move forward. The house was mine, my life was mine, and most importantly, my future was mine to define, unburdened by the expectations and manipulations that had constrained me for so long. That night, sitting on the back porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, I reflected on all I had learned through this painful journey. That sometimes being cast out leads to finding your way home. That strength often emerges only when all supports are stripped away. That the stories families tell about themselves are not always the truth. That boundaries are not just walls to keep others out, but foundations to build yourself upon. And perhaps most importantly, that sometimes the greatest act of love is not what someone gives you directly, but what they quietly prepare for you to discover when you need it most. My grandmother had seen me, truly seen me, and in doing so, had given me the tools to finally see myself clearly too. Not as the failure my parents had labeled me, not as the disappointment they had dismissed, but as someone worthy of home, of security, of unconditional love. The house at 47 Maple Street was no longer a battleground or even just a shelter. It had become a sanctuary where I could finally, fully become myself. Have you ever experienced someone unexpectedly coming through for you when others let you down? How did that change your perspective on family and relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and unexpected second chances. I'm so grateful to each of you for accompanying me on this journey of healing and reclamation. Remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges only after we've been broken open.